There comes a moment quiet, sharp, irreversible when the one who spent years holding others to account suddenly finds himself at the mercy of the very system he once controlled. That moment had arrived. And the man sitting alone beneath the spotlight wasn't some rookie politician or obscure staffer. It was Gerald Nadler. For over a decade, he was a fixture of power and institution unto himself. He sat above others, armed with a gavel and a glare, celebrated by headlines, protected by process, flanked by aides who treated politics like theater and law like a weapon. He called for accountability. He wrote the rules of scrutiny. He branded people live on national television with a single word, unfit. But not today. Today, the gavel didn't rest in his hand. The cameras didn't swarm him for quotes. There were no sound bites, no folders marked strategy, no assistants lining up to whisper in his ear. The chair was still leather-bound. The desk still polished. But the power had shifted. He wasn't behind the bench anymore. He was beneath it. The location was familiar, the James Madison Oversight Chamber, a place that had echoed with dramatic hearings and televised declarations. But today, it felt different, the lighting harsher, the silence heavier, the space colder. It wasn't just another hearing, it was a reckoning. And across from Nadler sat someone who never feared the spotlight he once owned. Pam Bondi, former Attorney General, federal prosecutor. The kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to command a room. She didn't storm in with outrage. She walked in like a closer on the final day of trial, calm, precise, prepared. She took her seat slowly, deliberately, without so much as glancing at the cameras. There weren't many in the room anyway. No press frenzy, no breaking news alerts, just the thick air of consequence. Nadler shifted once, adjusting his glasses. His face unreadable. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was defiance. But the man who once orchestrated inquiries with theatrical flair now sat like a relic of a fading age. The irony was thick. The man who once demanded answers was about to give them, or try. The room didn't buzz. It waited. And then she spoke steady, unshaken, like she was reading from a ledger that had waited too long to be opened. "Chairman Nadler," Pam said, voice measured, firm, clear. "You've spent years telling the American people that oversight is sacred. So today, let's do some." No one interrupted. No one dared. Because even before the first page was turned, everyone in that room understood one thing. This wasn't theater. This wasn't politics. This was the sound of truth, finally walking in the front door. Pam Bondi didn't walk into that chamber with fire in her eyes. She didn't need to. She walked with something far more unsettling focus, the kind of focus that doesn't demand attention but naturally draws it, the kind of presence that turns a crowded room into a courtroom without saying a word. And as she sat down across from Jerry Nadler, the air in the James Madison Oversight Chamber seemed to freeze not with fear, but with the weight of something inevitable. She wasn't here for drama. She was here for disclosure. And everyone knew it. The silence that followed her opening words wasn't respectful, it was reflective. It was the silence people keep when they realize something bigger than politics is about to unfold. It was the kind of silence that made even the old wooden walls feel like they were listening. Pam reached into a slim binder. No theatrics, no dramatic flourishes, just a single finger tapping a folder as if to say, "Here it is, a binder full of names, dates, memos, footnotes. Receipts not, just metaphorical ones, but actual evidence." She didn't flash it. She placed it. Softly, deliberately, like a prosecutor placing Exhibit A. Across from her, Nadler blinked, just once. It wasn't fear. It was something worse, recognition. He knew what was inside, at least some of it. He had spent years defining the narrative. He had curated hearings with cinematic precision, launched inquiries with the snap of a finger, and framed political battles like episodes of a weekly series. He was the gatekeeper, the editor-in-chief of Washington's favorite drama, Oversight. But today, someone else held the pen. And Pam Bondi wasn't interested in reenactments. She came for closure. There was no need to raise her voice. The truth, when placed plainly, has its own volume. Her tone was even, her language simple. but the subtext was sharp enough to cut marble. "You've demanded transparency from everyone else," she said, her eyes never leaving Nadler. "Today, you'll get a turn." The room remained still. No scribbling from reporters, no whispered side comments from staffers. Even Nadler's allies kept their eyes low, because deep down, they all knew this wasn't political crossfire. This was forensic clarity. In that moment, something irreversible happened. Nadler wasn't being challenged. He was being unmasked. The same gavel he once slammed for order had become irrelevant. He wasn't the judge anymore. He was the witness. And Pam? She didn't need outrage. She had the one thing that couldn't be filibustered, spun, or buried: facts. And the facts were about to speak louder than any headline ever had. The sound of paper sliding across a table isn't usually dramatic, but when Pam Bondi turned the first page of her binder, it sounded like a starting bell. She didn't rush. Every movement was precise, like a surgeon preparing an incision. She wasn't just presenting evidence, she was revealing the anatomy of a broken system, piece by piece. "Let's begin with the numbers," she said. Behind her, the screen flickered to life. A chart appeared. Subpoenas issued under Nadler's chairmanship from 2019 to 2023. 41, she said, were issued targeting Republican officials. The room shifted slightly. "And how many for Democrats?" Pam asked. She let the pause stretch, the question hang. "One." A quiet inhale echoed from somewhere in the gallery. Pam didn't flinch. "And that one subpoena," she added, "conveniently was never followed up." She clicked the remote again. Another slide, side-by-side headlines. One from 2019, covering a lightning-fast inquiry into a controversial phone call. Another from 2020, reporting on a laptop filled with sensitive emails, financial records, and foreign business contacts, an entirely different case. "That first story led to a hearing in 6 days," she said. "The second? Not even a press release." Pam turned back to Nadler. "Why?" No answer. No defense. Just the silence of a man who'd built the rules, now watching those same rules used to weigh him. She advanced to the next page. "Elena Harrington," she said. "A district attorney romantically tied to the same prosecutor she appointed to a high-profile election case." Pam didn't need to dramatize. She just laid it out. Evidence surfaced. Ethics complaints were filed. Media coverage exploded. "But under your leadership," she paused, "no investigation, no hearing, no oversight." Each example hit like a drumbeat. Not a cacophony, but a rhythm of neglect. And the beat kept going. 30,000 emails deleted from a private server while under congressional subpoena, she said, flipping again. "The American people remember. But apparently, your committee forgot." Pam closed the folder for a moment, letting her hand rest on top. "These weren't random omissions," she said. "They were patterns, and patterns don't lie." She leaned in. "They speak louder than politics." It wasn't just a presentation, it was an autopsy. A post-mortem on a committee that once claimed to stand for integrity, now exposed for selective scrutiny, convenient silence, and institutional amnesia. Pam didn't accuse Nadler of yelling, lying, or scheming. She accused him of something worse, turning justice into a prop. And as she clicked to the next slide, the mood in the chamber wasn't just serious, it was shifting. Because what began as a hearing was now unmistakably something else. An unraveling. Pam Bondi didn't come to speculate. She came with documentation. As the next slide appeared on the screen behind her, the lighting in the room seemed to dim like. Even the chamber itself understood the gravity of what was coming next. "We've talked about what was ignored in plain sight," Pam said, voice even. "Now let's talk about what was deliberately buried." She reached into her binder and pulled out a letter, printed on standard white paper, marked with the seal of the Office of Legislative Ethics. "This is from Dana Brooks," she explained, "a former staffer at the Federal Ethics Office, dated April 2021. She held it up, letting the room absorb it before reading. "A formal referral was submitted to this committee," she began. "It flagged improper travel reimbursements and irregular fund allocations tied directly to the judiciary budget." Pam looked up. Her gaze found Nadler's. "This letter was logged by your office. It was read. And then," she paused, "it was shelved." She placed the letter gently on the desk in front of her, like laying down evidence in a courtroom. No hearing, no follow-up, not even a note to the clerk. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. Pam leaned forward slightly. "Why is it," she asked, "that every time misconduct appears with a Democrat's name attached, this committee runs out of ink?" Behind her, the screen changed again. A new visual, 2 columns. Ethics referrals, 2019, 2023. Republican members, 14 hearings, 9 subpoenas. Democrat members, 0 hearings, 0 subpoenas. The numbers didn't need a narrator. They were loud on their own. Pam let the graphic speak before she did. "This isn't oversight," she said quietly. "It's camouflage." Her words cut through the stillness like a razor through silk. No shouting, no drama. Just truth with surgical precision. And then she pivoted, turning not just to Nadler, but to the full committee. "You say justice is blind," she said. "But under your leadership, it didn't just squint. It closed its eyes completely, so long as the issue came from your side of the aisle." A low murmur rippled through the gallery, then quickly died. Because no one could argue with the charts, or the letters, or the fact that a whistleblower's referral, once entered into official record, had simply vanished like accountability was optional, not required. Pam opened her binder again. And with the turn of another page, she made one thing undeniably clear. This wasn't a pattern of mistakes. It was a system of avoidance. And every document she brought forward wasn't just a receipt, it was a mirror. One that now reflected back on the very man who used to demand accountability from everyone else. Pam Bondi didn't need to raise her voice. She simply let the data speak. She clicked to the next slide. A detailed spreadsheet filled the screen line items, dollar figures, vendor names, government contracts issued under the Judiciary Committee's discretionary budget from 2020 to 2022. But Pam wasn't interested in the totals. She was interested in the connections. "Let's talk about procurement," she said calmly. "And what happens when oversight forgets it exists?" She pointed to one particular row on the screen. Invoice 77,482. Description: narrative mapping. Paid: $78,000. A few heads turned. It sounded more like branding than legislation. She advanced the slide. Invoice 78,110. Partisan impact modeling. Paid: $94,000. Another click. Invoice 78,945. Crisis response optimization. Paid: $86,000. Pam paused. "What part of judicial oversight," she asked, "requires hiring political consultants to test messaging frameworks?" No answer. No reaction. Only the echo of her question hanging in the chamber, like a light that suddenly made dust visible. "These weren't research contracts," she said. "They were political exercises, paid for with public money, routed through firms with close ties to campaign, adjacent operations." She tapped her folder again. This wasn't policy development. It was laundering and, not of money, but of public trust. The room didn't shift. It absorbed. Because what she had laid out wasn't opinion. It was a sequence, one invoice at a time, one redirection of taxpayer dollars at a time. But Pam wasn't done. She held up another document, a signed affidavit. "This is from Rachel Cummings," she said, "former Deputy Chief Ethics Counsel for the committee." She read it aloud. "We were instructed to delay or suppress internal reviews involving Democrat-aligned consultants. I personally flagged 2 financial anomalies. Both were ignored. I was present in a meeting where staff were told not to distribute an ethics memo implicating a scheduled witness with ties to committee leadership. I resigned shortly after." Pam lowered the page and looked directly at the committee. "The signature is real," she said. "So is the silence." Her tone remained steady, but what she had just read was anything but ordinary. It wasn't just procedural failure. It was a culture of suppressiona system where red flags weren't just overlooked, they were intentionally kept from view. She returned to the binder. "These aren't conspiracy theories," she added. "They're contracts, memos, signatures, and silence." One by one, she placed the documents on the table. No anger, no theatrics, Just wait. The kind that accumulates until even the most comfortable seat starts to feel like a witness stand. And for Jerry Nadler, that moment had arrived. He wasn't facing speculation. He was facing receipts. Pam Bondi stood still for a moment, as if letting the room catch up with the weight of what had just been said. Then, she turned toward the screen again. A new image appeared, not charts, not contracts, but something far simpler. Emails, dozens of them. Each one marked with the same subject line, Tier 3 Optics Risk. She didn't explain it at first. She let the words linger. Then she began reading. Delay until after midterms. Too sensitive for internal discussion. Let's reframe once the news cycle shifts. Not advisable optics, fragile. She paused and looked out over the chamber. These weren't messages from a campaign office, she said. These were internal Judiciary Committee, communications written by staff, sent from official accounts, archived by protocol. Her tone sharpened, not in volume, but in precision. Mr. Chairman, she said, locking eyes with Nadler, your job wasn't to manage optics, it was to manage ethics. She let the line breathe. The silence that followed felt like a verdict. Pam stepped forward. You didn't treat oversight as a responsibility, she continued. You treated it as public relations strategy, measured not by what was right, but by what would look bad. She turned toward the committee members seated around the room. You didn't just become selective. You became strategic. You built a firewall not around truth, but around inconvenience. The atmosphere tightened. Even the most composed staffers shifted in their chairs. Because what she had just said wasn't a political accusation, it was a structural indictment. She advanced the slide. Side by side, 2 more emails. Investigate tweets not funding. Flag speech content ignore contracts. Pam pointed with a steady hand. You investigated posts on social media, she said, but ignored signed government contracts linked to personal gain. She closed the clicker and placed it down. This wasn't dereliction, she said. She walked back to the table. This was design. And with that, she opened the final folder in her binderone, labeled simply, Internal Patterns. Inside were more documents, more dates, more digital trails that didn't just suggest negligence, they mapped it. She didn't read them yet. She didn't need to. Because by now, the room wasn't waiting for a shocking headline or dramatic twist. They were witnessing something much rarer. A methodical, quiet collapse of a curated legacy. Jerry Nadler had spent years building a brand of accountability. But now, that brand was unraveling not through attack, but through evidence. And in the stillness of that chamber, one truth had already taken root. The greatest threat to oversight was never the opposition. It was the silence of those trusted to protect it. Pam Bondi didn't need to raise her voice. By now, her calm was more powerful than any outburst. She reached for the last folder in her binder. The tab read only one thing: Full Ethics Submission. Subject: Gerald Nadler. She held it up for the room to see, not with drama, but with finality. Let the record reflect submission, she said. And with those 5 words, the air inside the chamber shifted. What had started as testimony had become something else, entirely a filing, an official declaration. She placed the binder on the clerk's desk, slow and steady. No slam, no statement, just paper meeting wood and a career meeting consequence. This isn't a political vendetta, she continued. It's not a headline. It's not a talking point. She looked directly at the committee, her voice unwavering. It's a record. She listed the contents with precision. Misuse of committee funds. Suppression of whistleblower reports. Ethics violations related to outside contractors. Obstruction of internal oversight procedures. Willful misrepresentation of committee activity in official filings. The words were cold, factual, almost clinical. And that made them hit even harder. Then came the sentence that cracked the atmosphere. This is not political, this is procedural. She let that sit. It didn't shout, it echoed. Pam turned toward the press gallery. Cameras clicked on instinct. Journalists leaned in. But Pam didn't look at them. She wasn't here for attention. She was here for accountability. Behind her, the screen now displayed the final headline from an independent oversight journal. Oversight weaponized. Judiciary Committee accused of systemic partisan practices. She didn't read it aloud. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked around the room one last Timino with anger, not with pride, with resolve. "You said no one is above the law," she told Nadler. "But what you really meant was no opponent is." And with that, she stepped away from the table. No gavel dropped. No vote yet cast. But something deeper had happened. The illusion of untouchable power had been broken not by rage, not by spectacle, but by documentation. Jerry Nadler remained silent, still, almost statuesque, but not because he was stoic, because he was surrounded by dates, by invoices, by affidavits, by his own initials scrawled across memos that were never meant to see daylight. And now they had. The curtain hadn't just been pulled back, it had fallen. For years, Jerry Nadler had been the face of congressional oversight. But within hours of Pam Bondi submitting the ethics binder, that face began to disappear from headlines, from statements, and from the very allies who once echoed his every word. The silence was immediate and deafening. There were no press conferences in his defense, no official party-wide denials, just closed doors and carefully worded no comments. And then, the public began to respond. In Nadler's own district, posters started appearing across subway stations and light poles. "Oversight starts here. We deserve better." A digital petition demanding his resignation surpassed 30,000 signatures in less than 2 days. Local leaders went quiet. Advocacy groups once aligned with his initiatives began pulling back. Even a Manhattan fundraiser bearing his name was canceled without explanation. But what struck hardest wasn't what people said. It was what they didn't. The voices that once amplified him were now silent, not out of protest, but out of calculation. The system wasn't rallying around him. It was moving on. And inside the Capitol, staffers began to take notice. Whispered conversations turned into reassignment requests. Job inquiries were quietly sent. It wasn't rebellion. It was evacuation. Still, Nadler stood firm, at least on the surface. He called a press conference in a half-filled room. No cheering supporters, no stacked podiums, just a tired voice in a tired room. "I stand by my record," he said flatly. "These attacks are partisan and beneath the dignity of this institution." But something had changed. The words that once drew applause now felt hollow, defensive, small. He didn't address the specific charges. He didn't mention the whistleblower reports or the contracts. He never even said the word ethics. And when he finished, there were no follow-up interviews, no cable news circuits, just a quiet shuffle of reporters leaving the room pens down, cameras off. Later that evening, a short clip went viral. It was a montage of Nadler's past speech times, when he declared that no one who abuses power should be permitted to wield it, or the gavel belongs to the people, not the powerful. But this time, those words didn't inspire. They indicted. Pam Bondi reposted the clip with no commentary, just a single line. "We heard you. We acted." And that was all it took. What followed wasn't outrage. It was clarity. Across the aisle, even political opponents recognized the moment for what it was: not a takedown, but a turning point. Not a scandal, but a standard being reasserted. Pam hadn't stormed into the Capitol. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. She just opened the folder. And for once, that was enough. The vote didn't take long. 15 members of the Oversight and Integrity Subcommittee raised their hands in favor. 9 opposed, 3 abstained. The resolution passed. Effective immediately, Representative Gerald Nadler was suspended from his chairmanship. No applause, no speeches, just the quiet shifting of chairs and the sound of a nameplate being removed from the desk where he had once ruled. By that afternoon, his title was gone from official listings. The Judiciary Committee website had been updated. No public statement, no successor named. Just a chair vacant, heavy, and now symbolic. The silence that followed wasn't procedural. It was personal, and it echoed through every hallway. In newsrooms, anchors adjusted their scripts. The story was no longer about a binder or a hearing. It had become something deeper. It was about memory, about how quickly legacies can shift when truth enters the room, and about how quiet justice can sound when it's done right. Pam Bondi didn't gloat. She didn't hold a victory press conference or do a victory lap across cable news. When reporters asked her for comment, she simply said, "This isn't a celebration. This is a reset." And then she walked away, calm, composed, the same way she had entered. She didn't need the spotlight. The documents had done the talking. The chair had done the rest. Inside the chamber, all that remained was a cracked gavel, an empty seat, and a stack of records that no one could ignore anymore. And above it all, a lingering truth. The man who once wielded the gavel as a weapon had now become its warning. He wasn't overthrown by outrage. He was undone by evidence. He wasn't silenced by enemies. He was abandoned by the facts. And in the final moments of a hearing that would reshape the standard of congressional integrity, there was no need for noise. Only clarity. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers through paper. It settles in silence. And it leaves behind an empty charas, a reminder that the powerful are not above the process. And that the process, when done right, can still speak louder than politics. Pam Bondi never pointed to the chair. She never asked for it. She simply opened a folder and let America see what had been hidden behind the gate.